Welcome to the Warships Podcast with your host, Kellorn, Venacera, and Arun.
Hello and welcome to episode 118 of the Warships Podcast. I'm your host, Kellorn, and today, Venacera and Arun are here with me as we wade into the massive list of topics for today's podcast. As everyone knows, there's been a huge change that's happened in the last few days. It's been enough to make grown men weep, women wail, and young preteens scream and rage. Ladies and gentlemen, I changed my hairstyle.
Good one.
I'm channeling Arun here, you know. Got to try it here. In all seriousness, patch 0.8.0 dropped this week, unleashing the reworked CVs onto an unsuspecting world. I feel like we've beat this topic to death over the last few weeks, then gave it a few shotgun blasts last week for good measure. That said, the wailing and gnashing of teeth has been extreme since the patch dropped, so I want to ask you guys on a slightly different tack about your opinion of the level of controversy that we are at. Are we at Alabama Gate meltdown levels, or are we at the RPF that people complained about and then it really turned out to be just a non-issue? I mean,
honestly, Alabama Gate also seems kind of like a non-issue. It's just that people made it a big deal. I feel like the situation is actually worse than either of those in terms of like what the actual game situation is. However,
I guess my point, Arun, was that Alabama Gate, it forced wargaming to change things, right? They changed the way Alabama. If not for Alabama Gate, we would not have gotten the Massachusetts that we got. So I was thinking in terms of Alabama Gate caused wargaming to change things. RPF did not.
Oh, okay. In that sense, I actually hope that some changes happen because I think some of the live testing is a bit ridiculous, but I don't think the situation is that bad in terms of how people are reacting, at least not in comparison to how big of a change it is.
I don't know. I think it's kind of something closer akin to the removal of open water stealth firing, or maybe even, the smoke changes. Something that's pretty global in the change in scale of what's going on, but not necessarily game breaking or ending. I definitely echo the frustrations about, having to basically live test this into balance. But I don't know, I've been trying it. It's something different. I don't want to say that it's fun. It's just interesting and new, but definitely not really having fun with it. But on the level of controversy, I don't know. I think it's somewhere in between.
I am actually having fun with it. It's just that I'm sure some people might not like trying to figure out these things, and they might not be having as much fun.
I guess my biggest thing is that I'm going to reiterate from last week, everyone, is that I feel like the level of effort that you put in does not get you the reward in terms of damage. Like it takes you a couple minutes to set up a torpedo run, and you get 4,000 or 5,000 damage out of it. And then you're like, okay, well, what the heck was the point of that? I could have done that in like 5 seconds in a cruiser.
Well, that I agree with. CV-wise, the thing isn't as great, but considering how CVs were basically a dead class before, the situation is slightly better. My main worry was rather that other ship classes are going to be negatively affected, and that doesn't seem to be all that much the case, except DDs, though. DDs seem to be... Yeah, the patch doesn't seem to agree with DDs very much.
Can you go into a little bit of detail about what we were talking about before the show, Arun, with RPF on your airplanes? Because that whole thing just blows my mind.
So basically, RPF works on planes now where it updates as you fly the plane around, which is ridiculously stupid because planes are so fast, they can do things that you can't do as a ship. So basically, if you have a few points of... so what RPF does is when you are somewhere in some position, which you obviously are, then RPF points to the closest enemy ship. And just a few points like this can tell you where exactly the enemy ship is. So if you have a few players that have RPF, they can work together and figure out where the enemy is. However, a plane is so fast that you can basically do it alone. And this also means that, hey, I know that there's a DD on that side of the map, and the CV can basically guarantee that they will find the DD within a couple of seconds because RPF points them directly towards them. If they have RPF on CVs, it should work in some other way. This is way too strong.
Do you think that RPF should just be removed from carriers entirely and just locked out?
Well, at least until they figure out a better way of doing it, yes, because it's too strong. Because you'll know exactly where a DD is, and that kind of beats the entire point of having anti-air concealment that is very low on a DD.
Fair enough.
I'd also, just kind of echo on that is, I've been seeing a lot of people really complain, destroyer players in matches, really complain about, well, what's the point of concealment expert? Because they're always lit either by radar or the planes are always kind of, constantly close enough by to keep them spotted. That a lot of, destroyer players have been complaining about, why do I even put points in concealment expert anymore?
I think that's a little extreme, Vanessa, personally, just because I feel like there's still a lot of benefits from doing that. But, I do feel like this has negatively impacted certainly the number of DDs that I'm seeing in games and, their gameplay just in general.
Yeah, we've been testing British CVs, and I know not really had much to talk or time to test them to be able to talk about them this week. But just getting back from vacation and getting back into it and testing these carriers, or at least I know I've been, just fly kind of close enough, light the destroyer, so the team always knows where the destroyers are. While I'm just zipping around the map trying to find, what is going to be the best target to try and strike and not lose all my planes instantly.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how it turns out over the next few weeks and what kind of changes get made in the upcoming patches here. But we have quite a few things to talk about this week outside of the carriers themselves. So in their infinite wisdom, Wargaming credited us a very long list of test ships and 15 Lunar New Year premium containers this morning. Getting the containers out of the way, I received the 4 premium perma camos, a few consumable camos, 60,000 free XP, and 16 days of premium time out of my free crates. Little White Mouse did a great write-up on purchasing 3 8,888 doubloon container bundles to see what kind of value that you got out of them. For my part, I'd say that they're worthwhile if you like Pan-Asian ships, but if Pan-Asian ships aren't really your thing, you probably won't care too much. What did you guys get out of your crates when you opened them?
Mostly free XP and time. Got a lot of premium time.
I haven't actually opened mine because I didn't know we got anything from it, and there's still no button to open all containers. Actually, I think there's not a button to open all containers. Is there?
There is not. That's something that not a lot of people get affected by. Primarily, I think it's the CCs that end up with a ridiculous number of containers, and the people doing testing on some of the test servers and stuff that have 100 containers or whatever, so that they can get items that they need. But yeah, it's like I said, I think that the containers are cool if you like Pan-Asian ships. But I also feel like the Pan-Asian ship community really isn't as big or as fanatical as some of the other ship communities in the game.
Well, maybe not on this server, but I'm sure, on Southeast Asia's server that it's probably pretty popular.
That's a good point, too. So, one of the big storylines from the patch drop is the way that detection has changed, which made the 20-second gun bloom timer permanent even if you duck into smoke or behind an island. Apparently, the gun bloom resetting after going into smoke or behind an island was actually a bug that's been present in the client for a while. That said, the developers did say that they have decided to implement something like the bug in the future patch, but in a more stable format. But patch 0.8.2 is the earliest that we would potentially see that. For now, be aware that if you duck into smoke or behind an island, your gun bloom will still be at full for 20 seconds. When you leave that smoke or the shelter of that island. So, I would be careful. I don't know how big of a change this is going to have for most people, but it's certainly noticeable in terms of gameplay style, particularly for destroyers.
Well,
yeah, I'm sure ranked, that's something that's going to have to be pretty cognizant about going into ranked.
Could we just skip patch 8.0 and 8.1 then, and just go straight to patch 8.2? Because this changes too
with
much.
The old
please.
carriers?
I don't care. I just want the smoke or the spotting change back, where I can actually fire my guns while I duck behind an island.
Yeah, that one. I guess I never realized that was a bug. I guess most people didn't realize that was a bug. I thought that was intentional. So
Me
the
too.
fact that they reverted it really, really surprised a lot of people. And I'm glad that they're listening to people that going back the other way, because it made a lot of sense.
I actually thought that was one of the better changes last year. So considering it's a bug, that's not good.
But the other thing is that it lasted for so long. I mean, they talked about the fact that it was unstable, but if it's really been unstable, that bug has been in for how long has that bug been in? 6 months, Aaron?
Yeah, it has definitely been many, many moons, and it makes you question. Hey, Wargaming, what's your testing team doing when apparently a bug manages to, especially a bug that's this prominent. Actually, I guess I know what's going on. Most of Wargaming probably thought that it was intentional as well, right? Because they probably also liked it.
Everybody thought it was intentional.
Expected product behavior.
The interesting thing to me is that in the dev blog post about it, they said that it was causing some back-end issues. But I guess if that was true, it's been causing those issues for a long time, so they can't have been that serious.
Well, maybe it's like server instability or higher CPU usage or something like that, and they know that this was a problem, for example. They'll have like statistics running, but they just couldn't figure out what was causing it, and maybe now they tracked it down to that specific bug.
That's a fair point too. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on what they decide to do in the end, but I really do hope that they go back to the way that the bugged version had it, because it honestly made the most sense.
It definitely did.
Like I said, I'll have to be really cognizant about it, especially as we play forward into some pretty serious competitive stuff.
Yeah, it was a competitive edge that a lot of people took advantage of. I know that I certainly did. So, but moving on to our credited ships, I'm going to list them all here so that you guys can get an idea of just what got dumped on us today. First up, HMS Exeter, Saipan, Kaga, Graf Zeppelin, Enterprise, Viribus Unitas, Yahagi, Leone, Azuma, Nustrashimi, HMS Hermes, Furious, Implacable, Audacious, and Indomitable. That was the list of things that I added to our accounts to test as CCs this morning. So obviously we haven't had a chance to test all of these ships in any detail yet, but there are a few things that I'd like to talk about anyway. First, Azuma, which I did actually play because, as you guys know, I've been a big Azuma fan. This ship saw some extreme changes from the first iteration that we saw. Her tier dropped from 10 to 9. Her HP was reduced from 71,800 to 58,350. Her central deck armor went down from 30 millimeters to 25 millimeters. She lost her hydro. Her main battery reload was increased from 18 seconds to 20 seconds, but her accuracy was changed to that of regular cruisers compared to super cruisers. This is a pretty substantial and noticeable accuracy buff when you play her, but the laundry list of things that she gave up is even more noticeable. The playstyle that I got used to and really, really loved in Azuma isn't really viable any longer as a kind of that long-range flanking ship. In addition, the rumor that the rumor is that she'll be the next steel ship in the arsenal, and I don't know how I feel about a tier 9 supercruiser being sold for steel when we can't use her in clan battles. So I guess I know both of you guys played Azuma, but maybe not quite as much as I did. But what are your thoughts about these changes to Azuma? I really don't even understand why they went this route, because I thought the ship was in really good shape the way she was.
Yeah, I don't get it either. And in fact, the feedback I gave was that this is probably something along the lines of that this is probably like the most release-worthy ship that I've probably tested, because I didn't really see any problems with the ship. And I suppose maybe they figured out statistically that the ship was too strong or something along those lines, and they wanted to change, but they didn't want like a straight-up nerf or something along those lines, maybe.
But it does feel like a straight up nerf, and in so many ways, though. I mean, it's them dropping it to 9 doesn't feel like it's going to do anything.
Yeah, but I mean, come on. Then you have to blame matchmaking instead of actual balance, okay?
I mean, Vanessa, did you think that this was even necessary?
The ship was just fine at tier 10. I do not understand why they dropped this to tier 9. Do we need another tier 9 quote unquote super cruiser or, battle cruiser? I don't understand. Like, I felt that the guns handled pretty well. It was accurate enough. It wasn't like ridiculously, over the top. It didn't like seem as trolly as Zhao. I don't understand. I don't understand what their reasoning behind all this, because I completely agree with you two. The ship was just fine at tier 10 and in my opinion could have been released and off we go.
The thing that I don't understand is that she was in no way like Stalingrad, and she was in no way like Kronstadt or Alaska, and now they've kind of taken that away from her. She feels a lot more like Kronstadt without a radar to me now.
Agreed, but maybe the problem was that she was ready too quickly.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, hey, I planned 2 months to do this job, and then they plop it, and then they're like, oh wow, it's already finished.
I mean, I know that my feedback for this ship is absolutely going to be take her back to what she was, because she felt more finished and more balanced in her first iteration than she does now. Like, they made it worse in terms of balance. Obviously they made the ship worse as a ship, but in terms of balance, she was way more balanced before.
Yeah, I'm looking at it real quick, and you said she loses hydro, right?
Yeah. There's a bug that lets you use the hydro upgrade, but she does not get a hydro. Well, sticking with the IJN ships, Yahagi received a round of buffs herself, including an engine boost, better rudder shift, longer range but slower torps, and a torp damage nerf. That said, her gun velocity was increased for better penetration, but I feel like this might rescue Yahagi a bit, as she was really underwhelming and underperforming in the first iteration, so this was a ship that I felt did need a buff, and they kind of gave it to her.
Well, I definitely also agree that she needed a buff, but whether this is enough, I'm uncertain. I would have to actually play her to have some idea of it.
Yeah, keep in mind, guys, though, a lot of these we have not done any testing with, so we're just kind of going off the stats. But yeah, we will be getting into these a little bit more in detail next week. Vanessa, I thought that you were one of the big critics of Yahagi the last time we had her, correct?
Yeah, and I have not had a chance to test her yet, and I don't even know what they changed on it, but the guns were just so awful. Like, for tier 5, if you were trying to engage anything over like 10 kilometers, it's almost like Leone. It's like, oh, let me just fire my guns here and watch the shells do one orbit around the moon, then come back, and then maybe you might get a couple football fields close to the target that you're shooting at. I don't know. I'll definitely test her, see if these rounds of buffs definitely help out with it. But
they did give her a velocity buff on her guns, so not a big one, but a little one.
Well, anything is better than what it was, because it was garbage.
So 1 orbit around the moon rather than 2.
Or maybe, low Earth orbit.
I don't know. Let's not go that far, okay?
So Viribus Unitus, which honestly I found pretty hilariously OP at tier 4, got up tiered to 5 and buffed a substantial margin with things like her gun reload was reduced from 32 seconds to 30 seconds. Her rotation on her guns was reduced from 45 seconds to 60 seconds to 45 seconds, and her Sigma was increased from 1.5 to 1.8. And she also got a bit of a secondary range buff. She'll still be a powerful tier 5, but I don't think she'll be quite as hilariously OP as she was at tier 4, at least in my opinion.
Is it Imperator Nikolai?
She was not Imperator Nikolai OP, but
okay.
What can you do?
Well, I mean, she's definitely not anymore, considering she's going to be in Tier 7 matches all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that is the downside to Tier 5 is seeing those Tier 7s. But, I mean, she's got a lot of gun barrels, and 1.8 Sigma is really not that bad.
True. Wait, she has 12 guns, doesn't she?
She does have 12 guns, but
Yeah.
I think they're like 305 millimeter or something like that.
Yeah, but 1.8 Sigma is really good, actually, for that number of guns.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So I honestly think she's going to be a pretty interesting ship to play at Tier 5 now. She used to feel like a big shotgun, and that's not going to be the case anymore. Nostroshimi received some interesting changes as well, with her turrets being allowed to rotate 360 degrees and a torp reload and damage buff. I really still feel like she's going to be underpowered at Tier 9 Destroyer, but she has a lot of Swiss knife utility, and this will help her out a bit. And honestly, I think that the 360 turret rotation thing is kind of a cool, nifty little gimmick.
Agreed. I think she'll be actually really good right now because there's a bunch of CVs flying around and she's pretty decent at anti-air.
Yeah, that's what I would harp on too. And I felt the ship was pretty good, pretty okay, not like outstanding, but you could see where like they were trying to, make it a jack of all trades, master of none. And these little changes really kind of, tip it into a comfortable gameplay. Might not necessarily be over the top, but I think people will start to feel more comfortable playing this destroyer. And if I'm going to play a Russian DD, I probably would play this ship.
She's such a unique Russian destroyer, though. I mean, like, that's one of the things that I have an issue with. As a premium, you want ships that you can, throw a captain in that you're going to train from other ships, and I don't feel like that's this kind of premium.
Well,
Yep,
that's what
definitely.
Grimyashi's for.
Yeah, but how many people actually have a Grimyashi at this point?
Well, that's what the Santa crates are for.
So you're saying that very few people have a Grimyashi? I would agree with that assessment.
I guess imagine for a moment that Nostroshima is released before the end of this particular ranked season. Would either of you play Nostroshimi over Fletcher or Z46 or Kitakaze?
No. What? No.
And it's not because I don't like the ship. I think the ship has potential, but I feel, I don't know. I mean, we really have to see how the meta kind of turns out in this ranked season, but I just think that sonar and radar is going to play such a huge role that, if you have a destroyer or cruiser that has radar or really, really long range sonar, I think it'd be hard not to take those options.
I agree. She's just a really interesting ship. Even playing her is just interesting. I don't think she's good, but she does things that I'm just not used to destroyers doing. Speaking of destroyers, Leone got a smoke generator from Farragut, which is a huge improvement over the smoke generator that she had before, and a pretty huge buff to her gun velocity. Frankly, this should make her a pretty nasty gunboat at Tier 6 with an advantageous smoke generator. And she went from, I believe it's 700 meters per second initial velocity to 850 meters per second initial velocity on her guns. And I feel like this is going to give the Italian destroyer line an intriguing identity of kind of like a lots of guns with a long reload but a high alpha damage type of thing that we don't really see in destroyers right now.
With 12-kilometer sea mines and, wood-fired pizza grills and other awesomeness, hopefully. I'm really looking forward to testing the changes because you obviously remember how much I ranted on the previous
iteration. Oh, we both ranted on the previous generation.
Yeah, and I definitely want to test it, and if it's got to be better than what anything is going to be better than what it was. And if that's kind of how they're going, I really, will have high hopes for hopefully an eventual Italian destroyer line.
Finally, we have HIJMS Exeter, which I actually did get to play a few games in. Her smoke and her heal at Tier 5 are frankly crazy, as I expected, but I found her guns to be a little disappointing. The HE is pretty great, as you'd expect from 203mm shells in both HE Alpha and Fire Chance, but the AP is just really awful. I wasn't able to Citadel a Königsberg at sub 8 kilometers. I wasn't able to Citadel a Kirov at sub 2 kilometers. Something about her AP shells is wrong. I don't know if it's the Krupp value. I don't know if it's the fuse timer, but something needs to be fixed there, because there were things that it was absolutely ridiculous that should never have happened. But on the other hand, if her AP does work the way I think it's supposed to, she honestly may need a bit of a nerf because of just how strong her smoke and her heal already are.
Yeah, I had some really good games in Exeter earlier in testing. And yeah, the Citadels came against ships that had paper for armor. And other than that, I think I had a Ryujo broadside at 6 kilometers, and the AP was doing nothing. So yeah, I kind of agree with that assessment. If they do kind of buff that, they would probably have to nerf other aspects of the ship. And to be honest, I feel like the ship is really good as it is right now. It might be a little on the OP side. I'd have to do a couple more games to test, but at tier 5, being a heavy cruiser with, the pretty decent hydro and smoke, and, that heal, having a hull heal, it's pretty borderline OP.
The torps hit really hard too, which I was a little surprised about. I mean, I hit 3 torps on a Congo for 40,000 damage.
I didn't get any torp hits, but definitely cleaned up with the guns. And the smoke, even with all the carriers, it was really easy to dodge and just out accelerate. Torpedoes being dropped on you, anything even with 2 carriers trying to come after you, it didn't seem like, oh, it was that big of a deal.
What about you, Arun? Did you play Exeter at all? I know when we first saw that Exeter was coming and we saw what her stats were going to be in the dev blog, I really expected this ship to be ridiculously OP. I don't think she's quite as ridiculously OP as kind of my expectation was, but she's still really quite powerful.
No, I have not played her, but looking at her, she doesn't feel quite as paper as other Royal Navy cruisers. And it's not because she has very good armor, it's because her Citadel is hidden away much better. So I think she'll still pop like all the other ones. Other than that, I don't know. The ship looks fine, considering we have the Furutaka at tier 5. I don't think she's going to be that dominant, because I just don't see what the ship could potentially even do against the Furutaka.
Honestly, I feel like she could if they fix her AP, she could one-on-one Furutakas all day long. But if they don't, if they leave her AP in a state that you basically can't use it, then maybe that's the way that they're trying to balance her.
Well, I think the Furutaka's AP can overmatch the bow of an Exeter, so that might be a problem. But considering how far back the Citadel is on the ship, that might not even actually give you anything, because for some reason, almost half the ship is basically just the bow section. Feels kind of like a destroyer, to be honest.
Yeah, I actually really love her. I think that it's a really cool ship at tier 5. I just worry that she's going to be better than the researchable ships, and that puts us back into the situation like Belfast or Gremyashki.
Yeah, and it's our first actual heavy cruiser in the game for the Royal Navy. I don't think there's any other. I'm pretty sure all the other cruisers are all light cruisers.
That's correct. We don't have any other heavy cruisers from the Royal Navy, and the Royal Navy didn't have a lot of heavy cruisers.
Well, doesn't the Conqueror
they did not go for it. Ha.
Or Vanguard, for that matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the Royal Navy just had different priorities in their building. They needed a lot of cruisers to kind of cover their empire, and so they went for light cruisers and not heavy cruisers like the USN kind of did later on.
Yeah, all I know is right now, I think I put in 4 or 5 games in it, did not have a problem in any of those games and performed very, up to my expectations. And I mean, the ship's probably borderline OP.
Alrighty, well, we'll see how she evolves over the next little bit. So I did not get a chance to play the Royal Navy aircraft carriers, but both of you guys said that you did. And Arun, you said something interesting before the podcast, and you said that you thought that the Tier 10 Royal Navy aircraft carrier was actually the best Tier 10 Royal aircraft carrier in the game right now.
Yep, the Audacious definitely felt, well, I can't really say that it felt stronger, but results-wise, I definitely got the best results in the Audacious, much better than Midway. Maybe I just got lucky. Maybe the planes are just so easy to use that things just worked out fine. Because remember, I've been playing the PTS and the other tests where I played the Midway quite a lot. But this is the first time I saw the Audacious and tried it. And it was just so easy to use. So she has 3 torpedoes per... or 3 torpedo bombers drop at once, which is fine because that's kind of what, most of the torpedo bombers are somewhere around that. However, you can drop really close considering the speed, and that makes it fairly easy to hit. And the planes are fairly sturdy from my experience anyway. The rocket planes aren't quite as good as like Midway and Hakuryu or I think Midway, because they don't have quite the same HE penetration, but otherwise they're more or less similar. The dive bombers are actually the special part. They have this bombing run instead of like dive bombers going really high up and then coming back down. These planes basically just fly in a straight line and keep dropping bombs. So when it's normally what you want to do as a dive bomber is either come from behind or from the front. It's more difficult from the front, but technically you'll have the same amount of potential damage as if you come from behind. However, with the Royal Navy carriers, that's not the case because the dive bomber bombing run makes it more likely...
it's not a dive bomber at all, right? It's like a high-level bomber?
Right, yeah, actually. Well, it's called dive bombers, Westland Wyvern, but I guess it's technically not a dive bomber. So basically, the way this works is that if a ship is moving forward and you come from behind, then you can hit a few extra bombs, meaning you can deal more damage with the dive bombers. I noticed I had a drop on like a Lexington that was sailing in a straight line, and I took half her HP in one dive bomber drop. Half, although on the other hand, all of my planes died before I could get the second one to a Lexington's anti-air, so... Tier 10 planes versus Tier 8 CV.
Yeah, but that's not something that we're seeing in any of the other carriers in the game right now. Like even if you get a perfect attack run off on other things, you're not doing that much damage.
Well, yes and no. They don't deal as much damage as these bombers did. However, in my experience, Tier 10 rocket planes versus Tier 8 CVs is... you can almost kill one with just one squadron of rocket planes unless your planes die because, Tier 8 CVs just don't have enough deck armor, so rockets just deal massive amounts of damage and the CV just dies really, really, really easily. This is one of the reasons why I don't think Tier 8 CVs and Tier 10 CVs should be in the same match, but for some reason we are. I thought this was something that we would only get on the test, but apparently we're getting it on live too, and I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I haven't had much fun with the testing. I do like the carpet bombing that the Royal Navy bombers do. It is very different, than doing that dive aspect bombing. You just sit there and get the ellipsis and kind of figure out where you want the bombing path to be, and then you just kind of drop a bunch of bombs, in a carpet bombing like manner. The frustrating thing is you don't know if you're really going to hit or not. I've done where, you should, kind of held down the attack to get that closer in or as accurate as what didn't do anything. I've done, just as soon as it's available, do the attack, drop bombs, get hits. It just sometimes you line it up and you'll get a ton of hits, and other times you'll get no hits. And the torpedoes are okay, and the rockets are they're rocket planes. I do kind of agree that for the amount of effort that you're putting in, you're not really dealing that much damage. Sometimes you'll get a really good hit, but it's just so few and far between. And by the time, you line up your initial attack, most of the time, you're down to 3 or 4 planes left in your group to then, turn around and hopefully do another attack. I don't know. I'm really struggling to try and figure out the AA aspect, where the sectors are. You'll see flak come up and, okay, avoid that, fly out of it, approach from a different angle. It just doesn't seem to really matter. The planes just evaporate, and you deal some damage and you hope to influence, but I've not really been having fun with it.
Well, I don't know. I've only played 3 Audacious games, but I think I average over 200k damage in them now. I didn't win all of them, but damage-wise, she definitely felt the strongest. It felt the easiest to deal damage. And yes, you still couldn't really do many drops on most targets. However, I found the carpet bombing would deal a lot of damage if you line up the drop properly with like a battleship or a CV, something that's really, really big that gets hit by almost all of the actual bombs. And I found that to work quite well. The rocket planes kind of felt similar, where if you lined up the drop properly, they could deal like 5k damage to a DD in like one drop. And the torpedo bombers also felt pretty decent. I actually killed Worcester that tried to kill me with torpedo bombers. And the Worcester really couldn't do all that much because you could drop the torpedoes close enough. However, I suspect that she wasn't actually anti-air.
That's another thing. The anti-air capabilities are pretty ridiculous. Yet at the same time, it doesn't feel like what we were talking about before the podcast got started, everyone, is that it doesn't feel like that defensive fire is really worth taking anymore. I mean, and if that's the case, is that going to mean that we're going to see most cruisers that are running hydro from now on?
It wouldn't actually surprise me if that were the case, because right now, well, defensive fire doesn't do anything if you don't actually hit targets. Now, this means that if the target isn't dodging, it's fine. But if the target is trying to dodge the flak, then your anti-air might not actually do anything. And because of that, well, having a multiplier on damage doesn't matter because, 0 times 2 is still 0.
I don't know. I feel like that dodging the flak, maybe I'm just bad at it. But I also, at the same time, I feel like it's a little unfair because in a real scenario, you'd see flak at different altitudes, whereas right now, all the flak is at the exact altitude that your planes fly at, and you have no option of going up or down to avoid it. So you just see like this line of flak that's completely unrealistic.
Well, true, but I mean, realistically, an attack doesn't take like a few seconds either to do. The planes would be buzzing around a decent amount of time.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we need it to be perfectly realistic, but at the same time, it feels wrong, like in a bad way.
I just wish there was like some type of feedback or something in the UI, and maybe there is, and I'm just dumb and I don't see it. But flak will start to appear. I will dodge and break off and try to attack from a different angle or go someplace else. And honestly, I don't feel that it really even matters because my planes just get obliterated. And I don't know what else. I don't really know what else to do. I don't know, feedback wise, what is the game giving me feedback other than I see black clouds? Oh, there's the flak. Okay, zip on out of there. And is there some other feedback that I'm just missing?
Not that I know of. I mean, Arun, do you know anything about the flak wise of how to, if there's any kind of indication?
Well, yeah, you can see the ship, and that basically tells you that your planes are going to die soon.
Helpful, very helpful. All right,
but
guys.
I mean, that's the thing, though. Is how are you? You said you did some 200,000 damage games. I'm trying to line up attacks, do attacks, and hitting targets, but nowhere getting even remotely close to that amount of damage done.
Well, I think it depends on targets. I think I probably had some luck with the ships I got in the game. So, for example, tier 8 battleships and whatnot are an excellent source of damage because they don't have quite a strong anti-air while still having a very large pool of hit points. Another thing is that, if a battleship sits in battle long enough, their anti-air seems to get slightly weaker, let's put it that way. And I mean, you can then drop those fairly easily because they're not going to, do much to you. Another thing to pay attention to is dropping on targets that are distracted, so targets that are fighting something else. That way they won't be dodging your torpedoes and doing all kinds of crazy things. And I find that to be very useful.
Some good tips there from Arun. I do want to move on to a couple other topics that we need to talk about. And maybe we can reiterate on the carriers and the situation they're in next week when we maybe have a chance to test the Royal Navy aircraft carriers a little bit more, as well as some of these other test ships. But the dev blog also dropped on us that an upcoming change is coming to radar mechanics. Radar ranges have largely been unified to 10 kilometers for the United States Navy and the Royal Navy ships, and 12 kilometers for Russian ships, with the exception of 9 kilometers for most of the USN light cruisers. Most of the durations for the the non-USN Royal Navy ships have also been increased slightly. That said, the radared enemy will not appear instantly for anyone but the radar cruiser. Instead, the ship will have to be within the radar range of the cruiser for 6 consecutive seconds to be detected for all allied ships. Moreover, if the ship leaves radar range, the 6-second timer is reset. The radar ship will appear instantly on the minimap, but the detection will be delayed. I guess, Vanessa, you've talked a little bit about the way that the effect that radar has been having on destroyer gameplay. Is this a positive or a negative for destroyers in radar gameplay?
I think this should be a pretty positive. It gives, yes, I mean, whoever is lighting you up with radar obviously is probably going to start shooting, but it's going to reduce I'm in a really sneaky position and I'm going to radar and I'm going to let the rest of my team murder you from a distance while I just sit here in a hidey hole radaring everyone.
Is it really?
I mean, like, how many times have we seen that Des Moines, tucked in an island that no one can get to, and they're radaring a full cap and like half another cap, and everyone that's lit up by that, the team is just turning and shooting at them, and it just.
I mean, isn't radar duration being increased by 5 seconds? Which
for
with
the
radar
for the non-USN Royal Navy ships, it's being increased. So like so Black and the Russian ships, it's largely going up by a little bit. So yes, it is getting a little bit more duration.
Pan-Asian destroyers.
No, I mean,
Pan-Asian destroyers, yeah.
Isn't almost every single cruiser getting plus 5 seconds or something along those lines?
Not from what I was reading. It's really only the super short duration radars, the Pan-Asia ones and some of the Russian ones.
The Soviet ones as well. But considering the radar consumable is 20, or the upgrade is plus 20%, that's actually 6 seconds. So you're actually worse off in that case than you were before. I don't think that's a positive for DDs, to be honest. To me, that feels more like a negative, because now you're spotted for longer with radar.
I think it's both a positive and a negative. It gives you a chance to react at least without being focused by the entire team, which is kind of nice.
Well, yeah, but what difference does it make? Because they're going to have the same amount of time to deal damage to you.
No, I think in practice it's a little different than what you're thinking, because when you get, say, lit by radar from a Stalingrad or Donskoy, you know that, I don't have to really worry too long about, you just need to go defensive, dodge a couple salvos, and then the radar's over. Even if they bumped that up a couple seconds, honestly, it's really going to be the same, because if you're radared by one ship, you can defensively focus on that ship and mitigate a good bit of damage, especially as a destroyer, if they're pretty far away from you. What is, in my opinion, always been the culprit is like Des Moines with a 1-minute radar, back before it was nerfed, just keeping you lit, and you really can't do much about it. And then the entire enemy team starts to focus you. Now, if you're lit by radar, okay, you've got 6 seconds. If you know that one ship now has you targeted, especially if you're running the priority target, if they choose to shoot or not, you can go defensive against that ship. And then after 6 seconds, if everyone else starts shooting at you, you should already be, at speed, at maneuvering, and, getting the hell out of there. I know for me, like when I play Planation destroyers, I always run radar. So I always try and set ambushes with radar, and not necessarily fire, but keep people lit up by radar. And that will definitely change my aspect of it, because instead of sitting there and going, oh, I'm going to radar and then let all my teammates do the damage, now I have to consider, do I want to start opening fire and give my position away for 6 seconds to try and get in some damage here, or still wait it out and let my teammates shoot? And then by that time, they might be behind cover or, already too far away from my teammates to really respond.
Aaron, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I agree with what you said. I'm just not quite as optimistic about it, because in aggregate, sure, with Pan-Asia DDs, it's different because they aren't getting a buff as large. But against like Soviet cruisers, in aggregate, you are going to be spotted for a longer duration of time. And the thing is that, at least in random battles, ships don't have you on target immediately, which means that you get like a few seconds of grace, basically, where the ships are still turning their guns and trying to target. Somebody actually tried to claim that, with the 6-second delay, it's actually a bad thing. It's a nerf to radar because everybody can turn their guns and ship in time. Hey, a Yamato turns in 3 seconds. Actually, I tried it. In 6 seconds, a Yamato couldn't even turn like 45 degrees with a full rudder active and all that. So, I don't know. I mean, the 6 seconds in random battles, in my opinion, isn't going to make any difference because nobody knows you're going to use radar beforehand, meaning that, well, most of the time anyway, meaning that ships will basically start turning their guns when they see you appear on the minimap. And so the 6 seconds are simply spent on trying to acquire you. But because you're spotted for 6 seconds longer, it means that you'll probably get hit more, in my opinion.
I mean, in terms of competitive, when we're using it in a organized sense, we would turn our guns before we turn the radar on. Maybe that won't be as big of a deal now. You'll turn the radar on and say, I turned it on, guys, start turning your guns.
Oh, yeah. I actually think in competitive, I don't think in competitive it is actually going to be any advantage because, well, okay, maybe it's some advantage, but it's not going to be quite as large of an advantage because obviously people are going to pre-target, and I think it still makes sense to pre-target even with this. It's just that it might not be as important now.
Well, we do have one more change to talk about, and that is that there are changes to flooding mechanics on the way. Ships will be eligible to flood in 2 places, on the bow and on the stern. It sounds like they won't. I'm inferring that they are not going to flood in the center of the ship anymore. So if you hit a torpedo in the center of your ship, you will not take a flooding.
No, I don't think that's the case.
Is that not the case?
I think the idea was that there's just 2 sections that you can set 2 floodings. One is like half of the front half and the back half.
Then I misunderstood.
Depends on which one.
That's good.
Yeah, many people. Somebody from Wargaming, in my opinion, clarified it on Reddit, and that's how I know this.
Gotcha.
I read it the same way you did.
Okay, because that was the way I read it in the original dev blog. So if that's the case, that you just have 2 flooding, front and half and back half, that makes more sense. Okay, so that said, flooding duration has been reduced from 90 seconds to 40 seconds, and HP loss percentage per second has been reduced across the board. This has the effect of 2 floodings in the new system causing less damage than a single pre-change flood for the most part. This will largely be a welcome change for most players, with the possible exception of IJN destroyer players. But I guess my question to you guys is this a nerf to destroyers, or was this rooted in the way that the CVs are changing?
I think it's rooted in the way CVs are changing, because having CVs have the ability to cause lots of flooding, meaning that, or at least there's a chance that they might cause lots of flooding, and flooding is hard to deal with. You know the saying, how about, oh, don't put out that one single fire. That really, the reason you don't want to put out a single fire, what it really means is that you shouldn't use damage control party when you are at risk of getting much more severe damage over time effects on yourself or on your ship. And so what I usually did, and what many people did, you don't put out a single fire because you might get hit by a torpedo, which causes a flooding, and in that case you lose like half your HP or something. And I thought that was okay, but if planes can cause lots and lots of flooding, you can't really predict that, because planes are so fast, they'll get from like the other side of the map to you and dropping on you within like 30 to 40 seconds. So you lose the predictability of when to use your DCP properly, because the planes are simply able to move so quickly. And so I think this change is kind of necessary so that flooding doesn't appear too strong on planes. However, I'm kind of sad that this will negatively affect DDs, because, DDs can't do the same things planes can. And it's not like they were doing a whole lot of flooding in the first place. So I think their situation is just going to get worse. And I'm not sure what wargaming could do to alleviate the problem, I suppose.
Yeah, ships that I could see seriously affecting is like the HIJMS. The torpedoes don't do a lot of damage themselves, but it's the hope for flooding. And if you get that flooding, then, that's where you actually get your damage in from the torpedoes. And, I could see some other ships, kind of being affected by that too, when your torpedoes have low alpha damage, but, where you hope for flooding.
I guess, in my opinion, I think that this is going to change the dynamic of why and when you use your damage control bar. A little like Aaron said, the rule has always been, hey, don't rep a single fire. I wonder what the rule of thumb is going to change to, in this case. Do you wait for a single flood and a single fire, or what is your what do you? I guess looking forward, Aaron, what are going to be some of your thoughts on when you would use a damage control and when you wouldn't?
Well, floods are going to deal about as much damage as fires. I think it's slightly more, or one flooding. However, you're still going to lose 30% of your engine power, so I believe in most cases, depending on the ship, you might still want to use damage control party on a single flooding. However, I think stationary battleships might not want to at times, because they, if it only deals as much damage as a single fire, they can simply heal it up later. And, it's better to save the DCP for the situation where you're on fire and flooding at the same time, or you have 2 floodings, or you're 2 or 3 fires or something like that. So I think battleships might change the way they use damage control party. I don't think destroyers are really going to make a difference, or are going to make a change. Cruisers, I think it depends on the cruiser. I think it actually depends more on the tier of the cruiser. The ones with a heal might actually let it run, but I think in most cases not, because even with fires, cruisers usually put it out immediately, because, well, your cooldown is fairly quick. And I think CVs are definitely going to change how they use their DCP now.
One of the things I thought was interesting is just how little damage that flooding is going to do to destroyers now. And, I think that, destroyers are, often will get killed by the alpha damage of the torpedoes from other destroyers, but that's not going to be the case from the CV torpedoes, which typically don't do that much, and at the same time, they're also not going to take much from the flooding anymore. So I feel like that they might be saving their DCP in some instances. I don't know. It's like, or they won't be, I feel like it's making the destroyers less threatened by aerial torpedoes.
I don't know, are they? Because DD's DCP is so short, even beforehand, that you would at most get like a few ticks because, well, 40 sec. Wait, isn't it 30-second DCP? I think it is, right?
I don't.
Okay, no, it's 40 something.
Yeah.
It's 40 something second DCP. So you're going to have your DCP up so quickly that I don't really think that makes a big difference. I think the fact that torpedoes don't hit as much, or aerial torpedoes don't hit nearly as hard, that's going to make a difference. But I don't think the flooding thing is really going to be something people go like, oh, I can get hit by that. That's not as big of a deal.
Fair enough. Well, we covered quite a bit of stuff today. Maybe we didn't do it in as a depth as we might have liked to because we had so much. But did you guys have any last thoughts before we close it out for the day?
Yes, I would like to tell every single DD player that's listening, the way you can dodge rocket planes, if you are basically alone, so you can do anything you want, is if you see rocket planes coming at you, then turn towards them or turn away from them so that you are basically lining up. So what rocket planes want to do is they want to drop from behind you or in front of you so that they can get the highest amount of attacks. What you want to do is you want to turn towards them, but not entirely. You want to go slightly diagonally against the rocket planes. And when they get closer and closer and closer as they drop, you want to turn towards them. And what happens is your DD will start slightly sliding to the side, and that's going to push you in a direction that the CV often doesn't anticipate and will make it possible for you to dodge rocket planes rather consistently.
Sounds like you need to make a video on that.
Maybe, I suppose. I have tried it against, I think, 4 or 5 people already, and so far it has worked basically flawlessly. I've been doing the DD versus a CV, on like a match on a map like North, and I've been consistently winning them because you can just dodge the rocket planes, and honestly, torpedo bombers aren't as big of a threat anymore. And dive bombers, if RNG wills it, dive bombers are going to hurt. If RNG does not, if RNG does not will it, then they can't do anything. And from what I've found, it is possible to consistently dodge rockets like that.
That's some pretty great info. Vanessa, what about you? You have anything before we close out for the day? Before you go play Ace Combat?
Yeah, in a couple hours it'll finally unlock on Steam. But no, just hope everyone is, having fun, or at least, trying out the new stuff here with the game. There's a lot of stuff to digest, and things are going to take time to adjust to, and hopefully, we'll kind of get to that.
Agreed.
Also, one other thing, I played the Grozovoi match where I was against the Tier 8 and the Tier 10 CV, and I shot down 53 planes. And it's not like I was like the center of attention of planes or anything. So DD anti-air can do quite a bit. It's just that it doesn't seem to be up to you whether it does something or not.
Yay, RNG. Well, that's it for this week, folks. Tune in next week as we talk about the teased Soviet battleships and go into more depth on our test ships, including the Royal Navy carriers, which you touched on a little bit this week. As always, follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Warships Podcast and Twitter at Warships Podcast for updates between episodes. Don't forget to check out Arun on YouTube and Twitch as well. We, of course, want to thank our amazing Patreon backers. As if you're interested in supporting us, please consider becoming a backer yourself. You guys are the reason that we are able to make episodes on a weekly basis. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week.